The Hibernating Bear. Non-partisan perspective, no agenda but yours. A sitting mayor with an approval rating that, in independent polling over the past year, has dipped as low as 6.6%. Not 6% of the vote, 6% of the city that still backs him. Watchdog groups call it the lowest mayoral approval rating in modern Chicago history, and his predecessor, who left office with an approval rating more than 3 times higher, still lost her own re-election bid. Crime, high taxes, and city governance are the top 3 complaints Chicagoans name in poll after poll. Underneath those complaints sits a city carrying a $1 billion budget hole, a police department short almost 2,000 officers compared to peak staffing, and hundreds of millions of dollars spent on programs almost nobody can fully account for. Chicago is the 3rd largest city in America, home to nearly 2.8 million people. It should not be this hard to feel safe walking to your car or to open a property tax bill without flinching. This is not a story about which party is right. It is a story about a city government struggling to deliver the basics: safety, affordability, and trust to the people who pay for it. Let me walk you through where the money went, why the police force is stretched this thin, and what could actually turn it around. Let's start with what's actually happening on the streets, because the numbers tell 2 different stories depending on the year. From 2021 through 2025, homicides in Chicago fell by more than half, with the city recording 426 homicides in 2025, the lowest one-year countywide total since 2014, and citywide overdose deaths dropped sharply too, helped along by wider naloxone distribution. City officials point to that progress as proof their approach is working, and on a 5-year view, it is real progress. But 2026 told a different story. Through the end of May, homicides were running 6% higher than the same period the year before. Over the Juneteenth weekend alone, 8 people were killed and 40 others wounded across the city, including a mass shooting in the Princeton Park neighborhood that injured 14 people, ages 17 to 47, during what should have been a celebration. The story made national headlines within hours. Here is the number that should worry you more than any single headline. Even with violent crime trending down over the long run, arrests have dropped by more than 50% since 2019, and the clearance rate for non-fatal shootings, meaning police actually catching the shooter, sits at just 5%. 95 times out of 100, nobody is held accountable, and fentanyl is still involved in over 80% of opioid overdose deaths across Cook County. The trend line is improving, the crisis is not solved. So is Chicago's police force defunded? The honest answer is more complicated than a slogan. On paper, the city's police budget grew past $2.1 billion for 2026, and the Non-partisan Civic Federation tracked a $436 million increase in CPD spending since 2019. But that number hides what is happening inside the department. Chicago police has lost more than 1,800 officers in the same stretch. Roughly 1,000 sworn positions sit vacant right now, and the superintendent has publicly admitted the force is down close to 2,000 officers from where it used to stand. Instead of fully funding those vacancies, the city has been budgeting less money for positions it knows it cannot fill, banking the savings to help close the deficit. Critics call that a backdoor defunding. To save $91 million, the department slowed hiring to 50 recruits a month and paused its training academy for an entire summer, heading into its most violent season. In 2023 alone, the department overspent its own overtime budget by more than $320 million, a pattern city auditors say keeps repeating year after year, regardless of staffing levels. An independent staffing study commissioned under the federal consent decree found Chicago needs roughly 270 more patrol officers and could free up over 600 sworn positions for street duty simply by replacing desk-bound officers with civilians. No new hiring required. Meanwhile, Chicago taxpayers paid out $231 million in police misconduct settlements in 2025 alone, and nearly $500 million since 2019. Money that could have gone toward training and pay instead of lawsuits the city kept losing. Now let's talk about your bill, because somebody has to pay for all of this. Chicago faced a $1.19 billion budget gap for 2026, the largest in city history outside the pandemic. To close it, the city raised the tax on cloud computing and software from 11% to 15%. added new fees on shopping bags, ride-share trips, and online gaming, and pushed through property tax increases tied to the school district, costing the average homeowner roughly $55 more a year, even after years of promises to avoid exactly that. The city's pension system carries $37 billion in unfunded liabilities. Credit agencies have already downgraded Chicago's bond rating from BBB+ to BBB, citing what they called sizable structural budgetary imbalances. The Non-partisan Civic Federation found total city spending grew 40% between 2019 and 2025, well outpacing inflation over the same years, and the city issued $830 million in backloaded debt this year alone, pushing today's bills further into the future for tomorrow's taxpayers to absorb. Independent credit rating research flags rising structural risk. Analysts cite persistent deficits, slow revenue growth, and heavy fixed costs. Chicago's BBB level rating means higher borrowing costs and thinner cushions. Bankruptcy isn't imminent, but risk grows without durable, recurring fixes. Pensions remain the biggest threat. Unfunded liabilities near $37 billion keep funded ratios among the lowest for big cities. Without faster payments and reforms, pension costs crowd out services, invite further downgrades, and push taxes higher. Downtown, the office vacancy rate has hit a record near 29%, according to commercial real estate data, more than double what it was before the pandemic. And while the city's overall population has stabilized thanks to immigration, the residents leaving are disproportionately high earners, the very tax base the city depends on. You cannot tax your way out of a structural problem while the people footing the bill are walking out the door. Here's where a lot of the money went instead, and why so many residents are furious. Chicago has spent close to $300 million responding to the migrant crisis since 2022, much of it funneled through a handful of vendors with almost no public oversight. One staffing company billed the city for 84 hours a week per worker, including overtime, at rates older people called exorbitant. Another vendor secretly guaranteed building owners $150,000 a month to keep hundreds of migrants housed in converted warehouses, a deal the city kept hidden until it surfaced in an unrelated lawsuit. More than 37,000 migrants have arrived in Chicago since 2022. The shelter system now caps out at 6,800 beds total, and most who are evicted after their stay limit have nowhere else to go. Reporters have also documented migrant families falling victim to rental scams and fraudulent leasing agents while searching for permanent housing on their own, a private sector failure stacking on top of the public one. Homelessness has risen in recent years according to the city's point-in-time counts. Shelters regularly operate at or near capacity, and encampments persist along transit lines and viaducts. Service providers report growing demand for mental health care, addiction treatment, and permanent supportive housing, while wait lists stretch months. The cost pressure shows up in emergency services, sanitation, and outreach budgets. Chicago has received tens of thousands of recent arrivals, many lacking legal status while seeking asylum. Intake, shelter, schooling, and basic health care have strained city and state budgets, with reimbursements covering only part of the costs. Data reporting remains uneven across agencies, making it hard to track outcomes. Clear reporting and competitive audited contracts would help ensure dollars reach frontline services. At the same time, a rigorous 3-year study run with University of Chicago researchers found that a local guaranteed income pilot, paying residents $1,000 a month with no work requirement, cut work hours, and reduced participants' individual income by roughly $1,500 a year. Despite that finding, the program was made permanent anyway, with $7.5 million in new funding. Residents on the south and west sides, neighborhoods that have waited decades for real investment, have watched hundreds of millions move through opaque contracts and unproven pilots, while their own streets, schools, and clinics stayed underfunded. Which brings us to the man in charge. Mayor Brandon Johnson took office in 2023, promising a safer, more affordable Chicago. 3 years later, independent surveys have shown his support bottom out in the single digits, with as much as 80% of the city holding an unfavorable view, among the worst numbers any sitting big city mayor has posted in modern American history. Only one big city official in modern American history has ever polled worse. Former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, who later resigned and was convicted on corruption charges. Part of that collapse traces back to a city hall scandal. Reporting revealed the mayor's senior advisor wielded so much influence over policy that the local press nicknamed him the Shadow Mayor, despite living out of state and voting there. The city's own inspector general recommended his removal. The mayor refused and defended him again as recently as January. To be fair, the administration points to real wins: hundreds of miles of resurfaced streets, thousands of replaced lead service lines, falling robbery and carjacking numbers, and a record-high homicide clearance rate of 77%. Those are genuine achievements, and they deserve to be said out loud. But when most residents name crime and high taxes as the city's top problems, and most don't trust the person running the show, achievements alone do not rebuild confidence. So what would actually fix this? Not slogans, specifics. First, fully staff the police department instead of budgeting around the gap, starting with the 270 additional patrol officers the city's own consent decree study says are needed most. That same study recommends moving hundreds of officers out of desk jobs into patrol by replacing them with civilians, real capacity without a new tax. Second, put every social program and shelter contract through competitive public bidding with audits before renewal, not after a lawsuit exposes the terms. Third, fix the structural budget before reaching for new taxes. The city's own fiscal watchdog says spending has outpaced revenue growth for years. Closing that gap with discipline, not just new fees, would do more for Chicago's credit rating and its residents' wallets than another tax hike ever will. Fourth, rebuild trust the old-fashioned way. Transparency before the story breaks, not after a reporter has to dig it out. Fifth, when the city's own inspector general recommends removing someone, that recommendation should carry real consequences, not just headlines. None of this requires picking a side. It requires a city government that spends what it has wisely, protects the people who live there, and tells the truth before it has no other choice. Chicago is too important a city, and its people deserve too much to keep running it this way. The Hibernating Bear, position accordingly.